Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Thursday, July 31st. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. In California's water wars, there is one challenge that has been difficult to solve.
The Bay Delta is the absolute heart of California's water systems, which is why it's always at the center of some of the state's fiercest water conflicts.
What is the Delta, and why do so many stakeholders want to say on how it should operate? We will get into that conversation right after these headlines. The CEO of California's high-speed rail says the project is moving forward. This comes despite the Trump administration's decision to pull $4 billion in federal funding. Ian Chowdhury spoke with KVPR's Central Valley Daily podcast.
What we have done now is replanned the activities to just continue delivering and continue building and deliver on the promise that we made.
The high-speed rail has been a target of Republicans who say it's a waste of money, but Chowdhury emphasized the rail's progress in the Central Valley. Kern County supervisors have approved significant cuts to the county's public health department. They voted Tuesday to eliminate more than $3.5 million from the department. They also approved layoffs for 27 employees. Bryn Kerrigan is the director of the department. She said the budget cuts largely stem from a decline in federal and state funding.
The cascading effect of these major, sudden, and simultaneous changes has made it impossible to pivot without impacting our services and our workforce.
Supervisors said they will aim to fill gaps in services in other ways. This week, the LA County Board of Supervisors took a step towards prohibiting federal law enforcement from wearing masks during immigration raids. Frank Stoltz with our news partner LAist reports.
The board asked county lawyers to draft an ordinance that would require all law enforcement officers to show their faces and wear identification, with a few exceptions, like when they need to wear a gas mask. Supervisor Janice Hahn.
This is a common sense, reasonable expectation of law enforcement in our communities.
Supervisor Catherine Barger abstained, citing concerns over whether the county can force federal agents to show their faces. Hahn conceded the issue likely would end up in court.
That was Frank Stoltz with LAist. Governor Gavin Newsom is directing state agencies to help boys and young men enter the workforce, enroll in higher education, and receive mental health support. The governor on Wednesday issued an executive order he says will streamline services for the group. Newsom says he wants to help combat a crisis of suicide hitting young men and boys. Officials say the rate of suicide in California among men is 3 to 4 times higher than it is for women. A Madera County supervisor is pushing for a mega Costco to be built in the county. This is only intensifying a battle over who will get to host the retail giant's warehouse. A judge recently blocked efforts to build the warehouse in Fresno, citing environmental and zoning issues. Now, Madera County Supervisor Jordan Wamhoff says his county is open for business. The comments were made on social media. Costco officials say the chain would bring significant economic growth wherever it's constructed.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from Fresno Mazda, part of the Prieto Automotive family, leading the industry in the IIHS 2025 Top Safety Pick Awards, helping move Mazda closer to the goal of eliminating traffic fatalities. More information and the Mazda digital showroom available at myfresnomazda.com.
And now to our main story. One of California's most important pieces of infrastructure is found right here in the Central Valley. The San Joaquin River and the Sacramento River, the state's longest rivers, along with many smaller rivers, together create what is known as the Bay Delta. That refers to the meeting point of all the rivers just east of the Bay Area. The Bay Delta acts like a giant hydraulic pump, responsible for moving water in different directions to water farms and towns. But for decades, the Delta has experienced what some would call an ecological crisis. That is because as large amounts of water is diverted from rivers that are supposed to feed it, to all who own rights to that water, it has left behind a trail of endangered species and habitats, as well as questions about the future viability of the system. How to address this has long troubled environmentalists, farmers, and the government, who've all sought to find water solutions that benefit them. But could there be a way forward that could please all parties? Right now, there may be one, at least on paper. Rachel Becker is a journalist with our news partner CalMatters. She recently reported that California's State Water Resources Control Board is backing what is known as the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes Program. To learn what that program would do and what key players say about it, Rachel joins me now. She starts by discussing the importance of the Delta.
The Bay Delta is the absolute heart of California's water systems, which is why it's always at the center of some of the state's fiercest water conflicts. It's formed by the Sacramento and San Joaquin river systems, which join at the Delta and flow out to the Pacific through the San Francisco Bay. And this is where the state and federal pumps move water from Northern California reservoirs funneled through the Delta and then pumped south to help supply more than 2/3 of Californians with at least some of their drinking water and irrigate millions of acres of agriculture. But it's also this really vital ecosystem that supports hundreds of species of animals and plants and endangered fish species. It supports about 80% of the state's commercial salmon fishery, which was forced to shut down this year for an unprecedented third year in a row because of alarmingly low fish counts. And it's also where Delta communities live and work and farm.
Yeah, and this sort of begets this ongoing question, and maybe battle is a better word, which is, should this precious water be saved for salmon and some of that habitat that you mentioned, or should it be used by farmers who grow food here in California? So tell us about Governor Newsom's current water plan and why it's been controversial.
First, I want to back up a little bit. And the fish versus farmers analogy is a little simplistic here because there are farmers in the Delta as well that rely on freshwater flows into the region to keep the salinity at bay. There are also farmers upstream of the Delta with some of the most senior water rights in the state that are part of this watershed. And then there's an entire industry of people also who fish that rely on healthy fisheries. But the issue is that the Delta is collapsing as an ecosystem. And state officials have said for years that the current rule book guiding how much water must stay in the system and how much water can be exported for farms and cities further south just isn't working. This rule book, though, hasn't been updated for the most part in 30 years, so it's due for an update, and that kind of sets the stage for what's going on now. And state water regulators are figuring out how to update this playbook. Do they go with strict rules that environmentalists, the fishing industry, tribes, Delta communities want, saying this is how much water must remain in the rivers? Or do they go with a deal that the water suppliers for cities and growers hashed out with the Newsom administration? And that deal is commonly known as the voluntary agreements or the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes program. And under the deal, water users agreed to restore fish habitat and forgo some water in lieu of stricter mandates to leave more water in the rivers.
And to your point earlier, the Westlands Water District, which is the biggest water district in the country, right here in the Valley, serves much of Kings and Fresno counties. They support this pact. They stand on the side of the governor. So tell us a little bit more about what Healthy Rivers and Landscapes, this program, is promoting. And it's backed by $1.5 billion of state funding. Is that right?
Yeah, about $1.5 billion of state funding, and money also will come from the water users and water suppliers. I believe that's around $600 million. And there's another around $740 million anticipated from the federal government, although I have heard some questions raised about how likely that is to materialize. And the idea is that by supporting the fish habitats, that there may be then that less water may then have to remain in the system because the fish habitat may translate into better outcomes for fish. So that's kind of the thought process underlying the voluntary agreements.
Okay. And why is it significant that these agreements are voluntary?
So it's voluntary in that the water users came together voluntarily to hash out a deal with the Newsom administration. It's not voluntary in that it will be enforceable. And if after 8 years, state regulators say it isn't working, they have the option then to go for top-down regulations. However, environmentalists, tribes, the fishing industry, Delta communities have raised a number of concerns with this from the outset, including that they were shut out from these negotiations, which prompted an investigation into discrimination that the Biden administration's US EPA launched. Other concerns opponents have raised included that these voluntary agreements rely on taxpayer funding. And other criticisms that opponents have raised also say that the amount of water that they offer up is too little to sustain the ecosystem or the fisheries it supports. However, supporters say that this is a really vital deal to preserving water supplies for farms and cities and is also going to be beneficial for the ecosystem. So it's really going to be a kind of time will tell situation.
Mentioning the conservationists, there was a critic of this plan whom you spoke with, John Rosenfield. He's quoted as calling this a, quote, shocking display of cowardice. So tell us about him and some of the other sort of critics' issues with this proposal.
So Rosenfield is science director at San Francisco Baykeeper, which is one of the organizations that has raised concerns with the deal. Salmon fishing organizations and other conservation-minded organizations have also raised substantial concerns, as have tribes. And among the concerns are that this doesn't offer up enough water to the ecosystem, that it is backed by substantial amounts of taxpayer funding. And another concern is that tribes and conservationists and community groups were not included in the negotiations early on. Another major concern that has been raised is that this could allow more water to be then diverted from the Delta via the Delta Tunnel, which the Newsom administration is heavily in support of, or by Sites Reservoir, which has been in the works in Northern California.
You know, I thought it was sort of interesting that Governor Newsom is not on the same page as environmentalists when it comes to this agreement or even that Delta Tunnel that you mentioned. Has he historically agreed with urban and ag water suppliers like he is now, or is this sort of a departure from his typical stance? Or maybe these issues are more nuanced and I'm painting it too broadly with the brush, but how does the governor factor in here?
The governor really picked up the mantle from Governor Brown's administration and ran with the effort to craft these voluntary agreements from day one. So this is not a change in policy for the governor. He has also been heavily in support of the Delta Tunnel, the Delta Conveyance Project, as it's more correctly known, since for many years.
Rachel Becker, water reporter with our news partner CalMatters. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And as we discussed, the state is giving the public a chance to weigh in on the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes program. The State Water Board will hold 2 in-person hearings on September 8th and 9th in Sacramento. They will also take written feedback about the plan. After that, the 5-member Water Board panel will consider adopting the plan. And that is today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden, Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado, and KVPR, with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. You can always find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.